Hey, and welcome to the podcast. The Day or Two podcast. My name is Mette Vilby Hansen. You can call me Hansen. I have recently been talking with Rachel Havekost here on the podcast. A really great conversation. We got to talk about something I have not yet talked a lot about, but that I am beginning to dive deep into because it is something that is close to my heart as I'm a human being and it is something we will live with every day. And it is just something that has always been kind of on the radar of what interests me, but I've not like had the knowledge to put words onto it, or I haven't been like represented in school for things on a deeper level that I wanted it to. So that's what I'm doing, or trying to do at least on this podcast, and especially on this episode, talking with Rachel Havekost. I saw her one day on TikTok and kind of fell in love with what she do and what she does. She has these dance videos and it was just so obvious for me. I'm sharing this in the podcast as well, but it was so obvious for me when I began to explore or discover her and what she do, that how she used dance as a healing is such a great tool for reflection and learning and education, I think. Like having this Me Too experience of what's it called, being relatable. That's that's what this episode's about, and we are talking about how dance has influenced her, how she has used it to as a tool to heal and to put energy out into the world and release energy and stuff. So that's really interesting for me. Might be the best episode I've had so far, but also because I'm more grown as a person myself. And so I can really feel that this is something that I'm getting more invested in. And because I as well has more knowledge about it and become more mature, just trusting in what I believe and what I want to do, and being more confident in that. So I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And then I'll just start the podcast. Let's go. Better now?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. I was for some reason I thought we were meeting on Google Meet, so I was just waiting on Google, thinking.
Yeah, I
think we're on Zoom.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, so I also thought about messaging you, but then I gave you a couple minutes. So yeah, but that's good. Great you found out. But glad to have you here. So that's really cool. How are you?
I'm good. I'm back in Edinburgh, which is it's just really nice to be in the city.
Yeah.
It's just great to be able to wake up and go walk outside and there's people. And I'm realizing how much of a difference that makes for just my overall mood. And so I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I certainly understand that. It makes a difference when you are in a bigger city or around in a more city with more people. That is. But thank you for being on here. There's your podcast. I think you just get right into it. I am having Rachel Havekost on today. And Rachel is a healing storyteller. Just gonna give you an introduction so that you know what she's doing most of. She's an author and she has written a book that's named Where the River Flows. It's a memoir of loss, love, and life with an eating disorder, which is a really beautiful one. I must say that I haven't read the full one yet, but I've begun it with the first chapter and two that you've been sharing. Yeah, so that's really it is it's special to read. And you have some journals and workbooks as well on your website. So yeah, that's some pretty amazing things that I think you do. I think that well, when I found you a couple months back because I have just graduated from gymnasium or high school, and I've been struggling with some things and have begun to back to therapy again. But when I saw your videos, which are what the things that I will be talking with you today about, is the dancing that you do and how it helps you and has been helping you throughout time and in your journey of this with your healing and expression. So yeah, let's just start with, I guess, sharing your experience on how you what it was that introduced you to dance, and use that as a way to express and heal. And yeah.
It's funny because it was sort of accidental. I went to Bali in 2019, right when my ex-husband and I first separated. One of the things that I knew I really needed that I wasn't getting, not necessarily from him, but just, as a natural byproduct of being together for 10 years and meeting when I was about 22. I had really didn't have a sense of who I was without him. I didn't have a sense of who I was as just Rachel. And so something that I really needed to do for myself was kind of figure out who I was just on my own. So I went to Bali, which I quickly learned is something a lot of people do when they're trying to find themselves. And a friend of mine invited me to an ecstatic dance, which I had never heard of before. And I was kind of, it's called ecstatic dance.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was in this sort of sort of season of my life where I was going to just say yes to new things in an effort to sort of push myself outside my comfort zone and find out what I liked and what I didn't like. And so I went to this dance, not really knowing what it was. But it was like at 11 o'clock in the morning, outside at this big sort of like yoga studio sort of setting on the beach. And I arrived and the DJ was kind of setting up, and the DJ said, "Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. The only rules are this. Don't touch anyone, don't talk, no cell phones, and there's no right way to dance." And I kind of thought, well, this is interesting. And I kind of loved that there were no rules about the movement. And I quickly learned that the people that were there had been doing, had been going for a long time, because they were so comfortable with this way of moving that had nothing to do with choreography or looking sexy or dancing with someone, or it was not about I'm here to look a certain way or move a certain way. It was just about I'm here to move my body and express myself. And so I spent probably the first 30 minutes kind of sort of just, bopping back and forth and mostly observing everyone else until I got comfortable enough to get out of my own head and stop watching everyone else and tune into my own body and think about, well, how does my body want to move? Clearly no one here is watching me. Nobody gives a shit what I'm doing. I'm so in my head about what's everyone else doing and what am I supposed to be doing. And I quickly realized nobody's here for that. There's no what's the right way. It's just what does your body want to do? And so I kind of tuned into myself and tried to just focus on how did my body want to move. And And I just like for the next hour, I just moved. It wasn't really about dancing. It was about moving and jumping
Mhm.
and squealing and shaking and crying. And like at one point I was laying on the floor, like next to this other woman, and we were just looking at each other, and I was crying and she was just looking at me. And it was just like this a very surreal experience that I was not expecting to have. Um, and so I kept going back, and I don't really know, it was interesting because I kept going back to ecstatic dance and loved it. And a few months later, I launched my blog and started
Mhm.
using Instagram as like a platform. And I made this mission of, I'm gonna start writing in a way, way to hopefully help people feel less alone. And over the course of the next few months, um, I just kind of found myself like dancing in my room, to like one song as a way to like just kind of like move and get in my body. And I was talking to my therapist about it, and I kind of told her about how I would just like dance around, or like I'd talk to her
Mhm.
about like going to ecstatic dance, and she said, "Well, Rachel, that's it's a form of somatic healing." And I'd never
Mhm.
heard that word somatic before, and I said, what does that mean?" And she explained it to me, and she said, there's a lot of information stored in the body, specifically around trauma, and shaking is a way to process um, stress. It's a way to release hormones and move hormones through and out the body. And like you see animals, like a dog or a horse, after it's startled, it'll kind of go and like kind of shake out its
Yeah.
limbs, because it's how we biologically
Mhm.
like move those stress hormones out. And she
Wow.
said, so it's actually a way to like shaking and jumping around is a great thing to do after you get stressed out. Like if you have a stressful conversation or conflict or get nervous or anxious, like just go shake and your body will move those hormones. But it's also a really powerful way to reconnect with your body after years of trauma, when we really lose that connection, that mind body connection really gets severed. And so when she kind of like told me, I'm like such a geek about science and psychology. So when she kind of told me about the mechanism, like neurologically and
Mhm.
biologically, I was hooked. I was like, okay, that's it. I'm dancing every
Yeah.
day. Like, and so that's kind of how it started. It was super on accident. And then I learned more, and then I was like, okay, this is a real thing.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that's kind of how it started.
Wow. That's beautiful. Because it's so funny to think about how, because I feel the same way about when I saw your TikToks, and just the way that as you explain now, that not only like we dance, but we also move our body. And like it was in the summer for me that it started, and I was doing it outside, also a little bit inside, but mostly because I've always been told that like dancing is also only for like the clubs. And
Hmm.
that's always like the older I've grown and the more I've been thinking about these things, I realized how much have been stuck or just building up in my body. And then when I like started this and just got, like you said, hooked on this, I just could feel it like it just it got me in a way that my body just, and I think that's what happens when we are aware that it makes a difference for us in a way that like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um.
And it's funny too, because it's sort of like, it's ironic because the whole idea about dancing to heal is that we
Mhm.
reconnect with our bodies. And
Yeah.
so much of that is about trusting our bodies to be wise and smart and tell us what they
Mhm.
need, and then
Yeah.
listening. And yet so many, myself included, like until I up here in my brain understood how it worked, I didn't trust it. Like it's a sort of like funny thing of like my body knew that dancing felt good, but that wasn't
Mhm.
enough. I needed to know up here in my brain, like I needed something analytical to go, oh, so the way I feel that feels good,
Mm.
like there's a reason. But it's funny because the whole idea is
Mm.
to get to this place of trusting without needing to know, and
Yeah.
get to the place of like, well, if it feels good, why do I need to question it? Why do I need a bit
Yeah.
better answer? You know, why do I need something
Mm.
that came out of a book? What if my body is just that smart, and if it feels good, that's enough?
Yes.
um, and that's something that I've been really wrestling with lately, is like getting out of my head more. Like the more I can get out of my head, and the more I can just trust that if something feels good, then that's enough. um
Mm.
the more joy and peace I find in my life,
Mm.
because I'm not looking for something more. I'm not looking for a better answer than it just feels not it just feels good.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because I played a lot of soccer and I still do that, but in this time period where I've kind of had a hard time and been beginning to therapy again, I have struggled to actually go to soccer, um, because of some social anxiety I have found out it to be, or am realizing, and I realized that the dance kind of gave me some of the same things as that used to be, but also some different things, that is the fact that it allows me to move my body in a way that I haven't allowed myself before, and to feel things that I haven't allowed myself to do before. And that was also what I saw throughout your TikToks and your videos, because that as a woman, and or as women, and like you've shared on your social media, we are just taught to act in a certain way, or be in a certain way, or not be too much or not be too little, or all these things. And yeah, using this way to, yeah, as you say, take control over our own body.
Yeah.
um and um how have you um how have you come to realize um that this is actually like what happens to us, um throughout, like, knowing it but also feeling it, and having conversations about it with your therapist? How has that unfolded for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been in therapy for a really long time. First time I went to therapy, I was 15. I'm gonna be
Mm.
34 this month, so I've been in therapy for a very long time.
Yeah.
But all of the therapy I had been in for, I would say, the first like 15 years of my life was focused on talking. It was focused on my thoughts, and it was focused on talking. And
Mm.
it wasn't until I started working with my last therapist, a few years ago, that I started to learn about the mind body connection. And she taught me a lot about, well, actually, that's not true. I went to so I studied psychology in grad school, because that
Mm.
was my one of my plans, that many life plans that has gone different directions. But I was going to
Mm.
be a therapist for a while, and so I went and studied psychology. And one of the books that we were assigned, I had took a course. One of the courses was on post traumatic stress disorder, and one of the books that we had to read was "The Body Keeps the Score." And in that book, the author, he's a trauma psychologist, and he talks about the way he talks about the way that the brain and the body work together, and what happens when we experience not only a traumatic event but just general stress. And he explains really beautifully what happens in the brain during a stressful experience, and how certain processes that normally happen when we are moving about through life just get bypassed. They get cut off because the body goes into survival mode and the brain goes, okay, these things that I normally need to do, like digest, you know, feel pleasure, or have a nice resting heartbeat, like certain things just are like, that does not matter right now. Something is dangerous. So we have to focus on surviving. And when we experience something traumatic, um, that's a big moment of shutting everything else down. Or when we experience ongoing stress, that's repeated experiences of shutting everything else down, which means our brain and our body are having disconnects. And whether that happens in a really big, severe way or multiple times, you know, over the course of our life, our brain and our body just start to not work together. Um, and that might not show up in ways that seem, you know, that important until all of a sudden it's a big deal. Like it might mean that we have trouble, like, you know, listening to our hunger cues, or regulating our bowel movements, or going to the bathroom, or difficulty with like our heart rate or digestion, or just a general feeling of like not really knowing what our body is communicating to us, or difficulty remembering things. Memory is a huge part of that process that just gets bypassed because the brain is like, we don't need to remember, we don't need to focus on like, how do I store this memory in my hippocampus? The brain's like, no, 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 it's just danger. Like, let's just survive. So these small things that might not seem like a big deal start to add up. And then, you know, people will experience chronic pain or IBS, or difficulty focusing, you know, things like ADHD, or um, just generally feeling on edge. And you know, stress and trauma really impacts the body in a big way, and it's a loop system. And so, you know, when our body constantly is not doing the things that it needs to do, like digest or sleep, or focus, that then communicates back to the brain that something might be wrong. And then the brain starts to think, oh, is there danger when there might not be danger? And so then it just becomes this constant feedback loop of, I'm always in danger. And that's, you know, when we start to experience like panic attacks, or like severe anxiety, or folks who have, you know, PTSD, or have experienced anything traumatic, of, you know, just a deep sense of mistrust in the world, and that the world just doesn't feel safe. So I think when I read this book, and then also when my therapist and I started talking about the mind body connection, something just really clicked for me. And I was like, oh, like this makes so much sense. Because it's not, I don't know, I think in a lot of ways it was also very validating, because I think for a long time I thought there was something wrong with my brain, or there was something wrong with me. Or I just, you know, grew up with the worst upbringing ever, and I was not able to tolerate it. And learning about all of this was like, no, I actually did exactly what this body and brain would do in that situation. Like my brain just was responding to what was there and doing what it's supposed to do, which is try and survive. And I just didn't have the tools or the knowledge to go, oh, this is not a situation that I have to cut myself off from my body with. And the way for me to move through this is to stay present with my body so that I can keep that connection alive. But I didn't know that because nobody taught me. So yeah, that was kind of like my introduction, was reading that book, and then through conversations with my therapist, and then just my own curiosity, doing more reading, more research. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. That's really interesting, and something that I've also been thinking about is that, yeah, we don't get taught to like sit and just be with ourselves. That's not something that is in the school. So yeah, it really can come depending on who you are, and like, yeah, what you're curious about, I guess. kind of as a shock, and for me it also was a big realization of, wow, I can actually like handle this in another way. There is a way to like figure this out also, and it is not something that is wrong with me, and it's not like the feeling I've got from others. And so that's very interesting to dive into. My how has it been like now for the past years? Has that been different, or has there been, I don't know, have you had any new kind of discoveries from your curiosity about this? That makes sense.
I think, I mean, I think the only things that I've discovered or that has changed in the last, especially the last year, is just taking pressure off of myself to have to constantly be healing. Like, so much of my life has been focused on getting better. And I started, that itself became a focus of perfectionism. Like I just, it was like I took the ways that I was putting pressure on myself to be perfect and have everything figured out. Like, I went to therapy and I learned to relieve that pressure so that I didn't have to be perfect, so that I could make mistakes or let people down or say no to things. Like, I was like, oh, I can, I get to have boundaries and be a person and blah, blah, blah. But then that perfectionism I started to then attach to healing. And I started to get hyper fixated on this notion that I needed to be like perfectly healed. And so now I think like I'm, the same way that I was sort of saying earlier, like, what if I just didn't have answers? What if something felt good and then that was enough? And in the same way, like, what if I didn't have to be healing all the time? What if I could just wake up today and not journal and not meditate and just go eat my breakfast, do whatever work I have to do something that feels good, talk to a friend, make my dinner, watch some Netflix and go to bed? What if I just did that today? Would that be okay? And um and it's interesting because I get, like, I get anxiety about like, oh, uh I'm not healing enough, or I'm not like, I'm not. And it's almost like an, taking, it's like an obsession with the gym or macros and like nutrition. Like, you shouldn't, it's really bad for your body to go to the gym every single day, and it's not good for the mind to be hyper fixated on how many calories or macronutrients I'm eating on a daily basis. Like, that's just a recipe for severe anxiety. And I like, just to use it as a metaphor, like, I was starting to apply that same notion with my mental health, and that, like, I need to be journaling, meditating, and like really reflective every day and self-aware and like doing something for my mental health every day. It's like, well, what if you just were a person today, Rachel? Like, and if what you want to do is journal, then great. If that feels like it's going to bring you some joy, go for it. But like, it might be okay to just exist. And so I think that's been a big thing for me this year, is like just taking some pressure off myself to like have to be in any kind of state of like, like, I've got to learn more about my mind body connection and be a master of my nervous system. And like, what if I just was a person? you know so that's been my, like, I think my lesson this year.
Okay. How do you, I know if balancing is the right word for that, but how do you balance that, like the I think between wanting to do better, but also not coming to the way that you are hyperfixating on it?
It's a really good question. I think that it's like, I think what helps is having goals. So like if
Yeah.
we use the fitness analogy, which I think is like familiar for a lot of folks, like um thinking about like, well, what are my goals? So if fitness is what we're talking about, like is my goal that I want to run a marathon in 6 months?
Mm.
If that's my goal, my training is going to look really different than if my goal is to lift in an Olympic lifting competition, right? Or if my goal is to um, lose weight, or if my goal is to put on some muscle, whatever that might be, that's
Yeah.
going to inform what my training looks like. And so in the same way, like thinking about my mental health, like, well, what are my goals? Like, is my goal to maintain the state of peace that I've achieved to this point? And if that's the
Mm.
case, then I just continue to do the things that I've been doing that I know work. But if
Mm.
my goal is like, hey, you know what, I just started dating and I've noticed that like I get super super anxious and insecure, so like my goal is to work on my attachment, then the things that I'm going to do throughout the week or in therapy are going to be focused on that particular goal. And
Mm.
so I think like having a goal really helps, because then we get to start to think about like milestones. We get to start thinking about like actionable things that like are moving us
Mm.
towards that goal. And then there's not this overwhelming sense of like I have to do it all, right? In the same
Yeah.
way, like if we don't have any fitness goals, it's like, well, I need to be running and lifting and stretching and swimming and walking and getting my step. Well, it's too much. Like it's a lot, right?
It is.
And in the same way, it's like if I'm trying to heal my anxious attachment and my trauma and my eating disorder and my depression, like that's just too much. And so
Mm.
figuring out like what is my priority right now, what is the thing that hurts the most, and how do I look at that right now to try and figure
Mm.
out what my goals are and what I'm going to do right now. So I
Mm.
think that's like a good way to find some balance, because then we can let ourselves off the hook for things that doesn't mean that like, in 6 months I'm not going to go, okay, you know what, I really need to look at the sexual trauma that I haven't really looked at yet. Or yeah, you know what, I'm noticing that there's some eating disorder stuff that's coming up, and maybe that should be my focus. But by
Mm.
saying, you know what, right now I'm focusing on my attachment or whatever the particular thing is,
Mm.
I'm not saying to myself those things are never going to be looked at. It just, I'm giving myself permission to not have to look at everything. So
Mm. Yeah.
I think that's a way to find balance.
Yeah, that's a really good, healthy way to look at it. Yeah. And you said, you mentioned, I don't know what word you use, but sexual healing, or what was it?
Mm-hmm. Like healing sexual trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. How would you describe that dancing has, we have kind of talked about it, but how would you describe that it has helped you, um in relation to the way that your upbringing might have been, in case of how women have been expected to be? Yeah.
Yeah. I think dancing has been very empowering for me, because like for a lot of
Mm.
reasons. And
Yeah.
this is something I'm still constantly working through. It's a process, but feeling
Mm.
like my body is here to be of service to men. And
Mm.
this
Yeah.
this notion that like this physical form that I'm in is somehow
Yeah.
is an object for other people, and which it's not. But that's
No.
been so ingrained in me. And so
Yeah.
anytime I dress a certain way, move a certain way, um, or behave a certain way, I have these automatic thoughts of like, oh, I'm asking for something, or oh, I'm
Yeah. Wow.
communicating X, Y, and Z. And I have to constantly check in with myself and go, no, I'm not. This is, my body is nobody's but mine. And nothing I do with it is any kind of invitation for anything. It is not consent for anything. The only consent that can ever happen is when it comes out of my mouth. And
Mm.
and so I think dancing has been a really wonderful way for me to allow myself to move in ways that feel really good, and sensual and sexy, without
Mm.
this
Yeah.
attachment to it being bad, or it meaning that I'm communicating something, because and it might be right. Like I might be dancing with a partner or in a group of people, and maybe I am communicating something with my body, but only I get to decide that.
Mm.
Someone observing me does not get to decide what I'm communicating.
No.
And um and I think like allowing myself to feel sexy was like a really
Mm.
big deal, because um for so long I felt like what sexy was had to be defined by the male gaze and what a man thought. And
Yeah.
it so doesn't. Like I get to
Yeah.
decide what feels sexy for me, and I get to decide what like that expression is. um and I think so, like I think in a lot of ways it was empowering to be able to kind of get that understanding. um but also, like, the other thing that happens with sexual trauma,
Yeah.
is the same thing with any other trauma, is that disconnect from the body. And
Mm.
so I also, dance has been a way for me to reconnect with my body and listen to what my body is saying, and move in ways that feel good, and not move in ways that don't feel good. And breathe,
Yeah.
and allow myself to breathe into my belly and let my belly expand and not have that be such a bad thing. And
Mm.
just notice like certain like sensations I have physically, which are all things that are really important when we're in any kind of sexual contact with someone. Like any kind level of intimacy, um, for me historically has been very, very much disconnected from my body. I just
Mm.
have, from my history with sexual trauma, anytime I would be intimate with someone, I was immediately just like, I'm only in my head, and nothing that's happening in my body is even relevant anymore. And I didn't even know that I was dissociating until, years after starting therapy. I didn't know that that was even what I was doing.
Mm.
Um, and so dance was a really great way for me to reconnect with my body on my own. But then also, like, dancing with other people is a way to sort of have that experience of, okay, I'm connected to my body. I can feel what feels good, but now I'm willing to let other people be in my
Mm.
space. And I want to connect with you, like whether it's we're just like, bumping fists by one another, or making eye contact and smiling, or like moving back and forth.
Yeah.
We're having to figure out how to be in flow. I have to figure out, how do I stay connected to myself, but also with you. And I think that that's been a big, like a really cool, like, um, a really cool way for me to rewire those neural pathways around
Mm.
staying connected to my own body while staying connected to somebody else, is through dance. So when I'm dancing with other people, those two things have to be firing, right? Like I have to be connected to my own body, which is the work I do by myself when I'm dancing, of like, what feels good, what do I want to do, where do my hips want to
Mm.
be, what's the beat, what's the music, how's that feel in my body. But then also taking that into a space where there's other humans around, and going, how do I keep that connection I've made for myself, but also enjoy this energy with you and have this back and forth exchange. And that starts to be like, it was clunky as fuck like at first, and it still is sometimes. Like I'd be like, oh wait, I forgot how to dance because there's other people around and you're watching me and this is
Mm.
weird.
Oh
And like,
yeah.
like so anxious. But the more I would do it, the more it was almost like there was no more thinking, and like my body knows how to do this, and I know how to connect with you, and we're jiving and we're vibing. And being able to
Mm.
get that happening in the brain is rewiring those same pathways that need to occur when we have any level of connection or intimacy. Um, so I think that's been like a very powerful thing too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely been that for me too. And I'll say it's really nice to hear this from you, because it's it's something that I have been that I've been becoming aware that I have been thinking too much about unconsciously, and I think that yeah, we all, whether we are aware of it or not, I think experience it because of the way that the world and the culture has like raised, or say that, but it's so nice to hear it from someone and wanting to speak about it. And I'm also getting so emotional because of that, because just hearing like the words putting into it and daring to do that, being brave enough to do that, and show that it's also okay to be seen in such vulnerable way. Yeah, that's really powerful and strong. So thank you for that and wanting to share that. And yeah, how I've kind of lost words now, but I really don't need, I don't really either have more questions. But I think that what I would like to ask you as one of the last things, also there's this Zoom one has only a minute left, so if it's going to close, I'll just call you up again. But if it's okay with you, I'll just have a question or a thing more to touch on before we end.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. But yeah, the one last thing I would like to talk with you about is just, I guess, sorry about that.
It's
But
okay.
need to figure out another solution so I don't have to cut off. But so the last question I'd like to ask you is about the way that you use social media. And I guess also because I'm very inspired by the way you do, but also how, if other or others who want to like maybe get a piece of, or like I don't know how to like being inspired by you, how do you by what you do, how is it that you yeah, just actually do what you do, like by how do you think that your work and the way you put energy and value into evolving the way, like that norms and society, that the outlook is on expression today for women, and how do you try to, or how would you describe that you try to or you do this, if that makes sense?
I think so. I had a really clear mission when I started using social media and the internet in general. I just my only goal was to make one person feel less alone. And I think because I was really clear on what my reason was, what my why was, I've been able to like come back to that in times when I'm lost or stuck or insecure or defeated or off track. I come back to like, why is it that I'm actually doing this? Why do I decide to wake up and post something on an Instagram story? Why do I email, people in my mailing list about anxiety? Why do I write blog posts? Why do I make journals? Why am I getting up and doing this? And I come back to my reason. And and I think that has evolved in a lot of ways over the years. And because of that, the message that I put out is often really different and varied and
Yeah.
multifaceted,
Mm.
and serves, lots of different functions. But the root of it all is to make one person feel less alone. And so I think by being really clear on that, it's helped me kind of have this sort of tether to always come back to. So like as I grow, I might like move back and forth around that single line. And
Mm.
sometimes I kind of fall off of it quite a bit, but I can kind of come back to that. And that keeps me sort of like on one,
Mm.
track, so to speak. Um, and I think that's been what has kept me going, truthfully,
Mm.
because there have been so many times, so many times over the last few years that I had just wanted to stop. I've just been like,
Mm.
this, I'm not making enough money. Nobody gives a shit.
Mm.
Like, what's the point of all of this? Like, I'm stressed, I'm burned out, I'm doing too much. I'm
Mm.
gonna just stop. I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop. And
Mm.
every time I get to that point, I come back to, well, why am I doing this? Um, and will my life feel meaningful, if I let go of that? And so
Mm.
it's a constant, like, I have to constantly kind of check back in with myself because it's very hard. Because
Yeah.
the only person that's telling me what to do every day is me. I don't have a boss. I don't
Mm.
have a contract. I don't have, deadlines or tasks. Like if I don't get
Mm.
up in the morning and say, okay, Rachel, this is what we're going to do, then, nothing happens. So I have to really check in with myself a lot around why I'm doing what I do.
Yeah.
And just keep evaluating if it makes sense to keep doing
Mm.
it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely right. When you're doing it by yourself, you have to check in when it's something that lights, um that is so important and lights the light inside one. Um so that was quite that, but I actually forgot a question in the side, so if that's okay, we can
Yeah.
close on that one. So when was it that you found out about, or realized that you could go to therapy, and that was a thing that could help you, and that we in general as a human can choose to open up and talk and help ourselves heal from things with this?
Yeah. It wasn't until, um, maybe 10 years after I first started going to therapy that I thought, oh, this is helpful.
Oh.
um, I when I first went to therapy, it was not by choice. I was like 15
Mm.
or 16 years old, and I was struggling with anorexia, and my mom kind of caught on to what was happening and took me
Okay.
to a doctor, took me to a therapist, and I had no interest in getting better. I was very happy to be living in my eating disorder and wanted nothing to do with my therapist, who was some like middle-aged man who I thought was
Um,
just could never possibly understand, teenage girl struggling
yeah.
with eating disorder, and my doctor, who was just like perfectly thin. And I thought, fuck you. What do you what do you know? Like, you've got a great body. I was so fixated on
Mm.
one thing, which was I needed to change my body and nobody was going to stop me. And
Mm.
um and I also just didn't think that the thoughts I was having or the feelings I was having were anything other than I just don't like the way I look. Like it just didn't seem like it was anything else. And there was
Mm.
also nothing, available to me or anyone at that time. It was like
Mm.
2005, I think, when I first went to therapy. There
Yeah.
was no such thing as there was MySpace, but there was no, that was like the only social media that existed. Um, Most of the information I got about, my body or dating was from like a tabloid magazine like Star or Us Weekly or whatever. Um, and there was no education in school about mental health. It was a
Mm.
very, very stigmatized thing. Like if you went to therapy, like
Yeah.
something was really, really wrong.
Yeah.
So I was very much isolated in my own mind around what was normal and what was not normal, what was acceptable, what was not acceptable. And I I went I went to therapy by choice for the first time in college when I was suicidally depressed, and I actually attempted to take my life in my second year of college. And after that, I started to go to therapy voluntarily.
Mm.
And I still wasn't like, oh, this is great. I was just kind of like, well, I think this is what I'm supposed to do, but also I think that there's something really wrong with me, and it's very shameful that I have to come here. And I don't know, it just didn't seem like something that was beneficial. And
Mm.
if it more felt like I have to do this because I'm a problem to solve, and clearly there's something problematic with me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until like maybe 5 years later, um, years after I had met my now ex-husband, who was my boyfriend at the time. We were living
Mm.
together, and I was relapsing in my eating disorder. And he sat me down at dinner one day and said, Rachel, um, you have an eating disorder, and I really want you to get some help because I think it's getting really bad. And there was something about his concern and like directness with me that felt like unnervingly loving. Um,
Mm.
and and so I agreed to go to seek treatment, and I went to eating disorder um, treatment, which was like a intensive outpatient program that lasted several months. And I was in a group therapy and learning dialectical behavior therapy skills, and having a nutritionist and a psychiatrist, and working with people at meal times. And it was the first time I'd ever been in group therapy. And I
Mm.
remember being in my first group therapy session, and I just sat there in silence. Like I didn't say a word. I just sat there listening to other women talking about their thoughts and their experiences. And I remember thinking two things. I remember thinking, how the fuck are you so comfortable talking about this? And thinking like, what, like, nothing's coming out of my mouth. Like, good luck getting me to talk. And then the second thing I thought was, oh my God, I have had every single thought that these people are saying.
Mm.
And it was one of the most relieving experiences to know that I was not alone, to know that the things I was feeling and thinking were not isolated to me. It was not a me problem. It was a my disorder problem. And it was not a me problem. It was a culture problem. It was not a me problem. It was the way I was brought up problem. And to be able to remove the problem from me and look at it from the outside and go, oh, other people experience this too from having similar things, in their life. Which means if we all have this similar thing that we're dealing with, then the thing that they're giving me to help must actually help, because it's not actually an issue with me, and it's an issue that many people experience, which means that there's actually a remedy. And so I finally was willing to give therapy like an actual go. um, and I did. And I think after that program, that was when I decided to go get my master's degree, because I was like, that was an amazing experience. I want to be able to pay
Mm.
it forward. I want to go um, become a therapist and work in an eating disorder facility and help other women have the same experience that I had. And that was, I think, my sort of initiation into, oh, this stuff works.
Mm.
And we need to talk more about um, the fact that we all experience a lot of things that we don't talk about. We just need to talk more. And so I think I started to
Yeah.
get really interested in advocacy and speaking up more about my
Mm.
own story, and destigmatizing mental health, and just adding language in places where there was no language. Um, so I think that was kind of the pivoting moment for me.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's a very touching story. Um, and very relatable in some points or in similar ways. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Um, and yeah, yeah, that's some things to learn on. Wow, I really appreciate that. And yeah, that you are one of the persons that care and are aware to and want to do a difference in this for people like both of us and all the others. So yeah, thank you for being here on the podcast and sharing all of this. Yeah, that was really it. I don't know if you have anything left you want to say.
No, just thank you so much for having me. It means a lot, and I just appreciate you being a part of this web of creating more conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, if you want, you can go to follow Rachel on socials also. Rachel Havekost on TikTok and Instagram, and go to her website and check out some of her stuff that she's done. Really inspiring and really helpful. So, and yes, that was all I just had this. So yeah, I'll just cut it off or end it here.